Welcome back to Tremaine's Trucks YouTube, my how-to series of videos for 67 to 72 Chevy and GMC trucks, Blazers, Jimmys, Suburbans, pretty much anything 67 to 72 GM truck. So before we get started with today's videos, we need to take a little look at safety. So the first thing you want to do is disconnect the negative side of your battery. Make sure that you have no power going through your truck. You don't want any electrical fires, electrical shorts, vehicle starting in gear while you're not ready for it, because we are going to be dealing with some electrical and shifting the vehicle while you're not in it, ready for it to be shifted into neutral. So disconnect your battery, negative side, block your tire so it don't roll, and we'll get started here with today's video, how to column swap. Okay, on today's episode of Tremaine's Trucks How To, we're going to show you how to remove a steering column out of a 1972 Chevy C20 pickup. It's pretty much the same procedure for any 67 to 72 C10, C20, C30, K-Series trucks, Blazers, Suburbans. So the first thing you got to do is pull the steering wheel off. Once you get your horn button pulled off, you get your horn cap off of there. Make sure you get the little horn ring out of there as well. And you need to get yourself a steering wheel puller like this. You can rent these at the local auto parts stores if you don't own one. And the first thing you want to do is get this nut down here that I've already loosened. There's a 3/4 inch hex nut. Takes a 3/4 inch socket. You got to get that out of there. I don't know how well you can see it, but you got to get that nut at least loose and to the top of the threads, or pull it all the way off. So I've actually already pulled this steering wheel loose using the steering wheel puller. You can see a little demonstration. Boom, it's loose. Steering wheel's ready to come off with that big nut come off, and the steering wheel will pop right off. So we're going to pop the steering wheel off now that it's loose using the steering wheel puller. I'm going to pull the steering wheel puller off, pull the nut off, pull the steering wheel off, and then we'll get back to the column drop. Okay, so here's the tools you're going to need for pulling the steering column. You're going to need a 3/8 ratchet. That's preferred. It doesn't have to be a 3/8 ratchet, but a 3/8 ratchet. You need a 1/2 inch socket and a 4-inch extension. You're going to need a 1/4 inch ratchet, which I'm using my electric gun, so I didn't put a ratchet on the table, sorry. 1/4 inch extension with a 5/16 socket on it. You're going to need a 5/16 wrench. I've got also a 5/16 line wrench. You need a 1/2 inch wrench, 9/16 wrench, 2 different size needle nose pliers, a couple of different pry bars is a good idea. You need a little pocket screwdriver like this one here. You need a Phillips screwdriver number 2. You need a Phillips screwdriver number 3. I've got my electric ratchet. Some PV blaster is always good for soaking the bolts. And that pretty much is what you're going to need for today's column. And then we're going to go on to the gauge cluster, which includes pretty much all these tools are included in that. Okay, so first thing you do with the column pull, after you get the steering wheel off, is pull these 2 screws right here out. This is the cover on the bottom. And you've got this plate right here, which is basically your brake and clutch pedal stop. You want to get that off. Those are 1/2 inch hex. Sometimes they don't go easy. So you drop this plate down, and you get up here is the column half boom clamp. What I do is I loosen up this side here. You can go to this side over here, loosen this side. that bolt all the way out. And you'll see the column pretty much drop. So at this point, now this truck's a standard shift. You have a column shift truck. This is the wire going from your column shift light up into the gauge cluster, and you need to remove this bulb out of your back of your gauge cluster. It has the wire going down to the column shift indicator. Okay, so the next thing is the column clamp, or the column collar here that goes into the firewall. There's two 5/16 hex screws on either side of it. You want to get in there and pull those screws out right now. And make sure you grab them. They have a tendency to fall down and get lost behind the carpet or the floor mat. So, and at this point too, if this was a column shift truck, up on top of the column up here, I'll go show you a column here later in the video, is going to be your neutral safety switch and your reverse light switch. And you're going to have to disconnect those wires going to those when you get the column drop down a little bit further. So now we're going to go into the hood and get to the column clamp and collar on the firewall side. Okay, so under the hood here, what you're going to have to do is pull this clamp off of this bracket here that bolts to the firewall. This clamp goes around the column. Now, one thing I didn't show you, but the reason I didn't take both the bolts out of the half moon strap under the column inside is so it catches it and doesn't let it fall. It's really not a big deal, but we're going to remove this clamp right here, and then we'll remove this bracket. Now, one thing, to get this bracket out, you've got to loosen up the brake booster bolts on this side, because this bracket does sit behind the brake booster. If you have manual brakes, you don't have to worry about loosening the brake booster up, obviously. But so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this clamp off of here, and I'm going to have to get my arms in the way to get to it. So excuse me while I block your view. So this takes a 1/2 inch socket and a 1/2 inch wrench to remove this collar here. You want to be careful you don't lose the nut down there. Pull this off the rest of the way. Oh, or your socket, your ratchet, or your wrench, or any of the above. Have to retrieve that. Hold on a minute. So once you get the nut and the bolt out of this clamp, you have a good view of the clamp there, so I can show them how to pull it off. You just got to open that clamp up and slide it down off of the column and the bracket that it's on. Just got to open it up like that and slide it down. Gotta be careful because it'll pinch you. Got pinched by him more than once. There it went, hit the ground. So, the next thing we're going to do is loosen up the brake booster bolts here. So we can get the bracket out from under the brake booster. On the top. Can't get a air wrench in here most of the time because the studs are too long and there's a little clearance issue. So you don't have to loosen it too much, just a little bit. Loosen this bracket as well. Support rod. Get a little more. That should do it. Next we're going to the bolts that hold the bracket onto the firewall. make note, you need this big long bolt in that top, because the threaded nut inside is way in there, so you need this big long bolt to be on the top of this bracket here and the bottom of the booster. As you can see, this bolt's not nearly as long, it has a big giant washer on it. If you get them mixed up, you'll never get that one started. And you should have enough here to get the clamp out of the way, the bracket out of the way. You gotta just loosen that. Yep, there we go. Got the bracket out of the way. Okay, seeing how the truck that we replaced the column in for this video was a manual transmission, did not have neutral safety switch or backup light switch on the column, so, and it did not have shift linkage either. So I thought it might be easier to show you out of the truck since there's limited space up under the dash. But once you drop your column, you're probably going to see from this angle about here on top of the column down under the brake pedal bracket, you'll see this switch here. This is your neutral safety switch here. The purple wire bulkhead is the neutral safety, and this is for your backup lamps, reverse lights. So all you got to do is get a little screwdriver in there. These are already loose, obviously, because I had this apart. But get a little screwdriver in there, pry these out. They'll come right off like this. Disconnect those, get them out of the way. Don't forget to hook them back up. Without your neutral safety switch wire hooked up, your truck will not start. So if you forget to hook this up, you get in, your truck won't start. Think about this and make sure it's plugged in. Might want to think about replacing the neutral safety switch at the same time, since they're fairly inexpensive. So the next thing I'm going to show you off of the truck is the shift linkage for an automatic. Now this is if you have an automatic on the column. Under the hood is where you're going to see this. You can see that this here is the bottom end of the column under the hood where it attaches to the lower shaft. So you'll have here, this here is your shift rod that goes down to the transmission linkage mounted to the frame. Okay, the shift arm coming out of the column. Now this is out of an RV, that's why it's got a bent arm. Pay no attention to that. So you have your linkage rod clamp right here. You need a 9/16 wrench. So you want to loosen this up. Now, one thing I need to note right now is make sure that you have your parking brakes set, and I would recommend highly putting a block under the tires, because you're going to be shifting your truck into neutral while you're under the hood. And now is where it's going to roll away, and if you're lucky, it'll roll backwards and damage something else. If you're unlucky, it'll run you over, go forward. So make sure your tires are blocked. So anyway, you want to loosen this nut right here on this clamp. Okay, get it loose. Now this is where you're going to shift your truck into neutral. This arm should stay in place. You want to slide this rod down out. Now at this point you're shifting your truck. It'll slide right out like that. Let it go to the side. Now when you put this back in, take note that this, the little V in that thing, is what clamps to the rod and holds it in place. So when you put it back together, you slide the rod through there. Make sure you've got that V in the cup position. Get it back up into place. Maybe it'd be wise to make a mark on it. Tighten this nut down. Make sure it's good and tight. If you don't tighten this nut down tight enough, this will just slide on the rod like that. It won't shift proper. Okay, so the next thing you got to do is pull the collar off of that connects the lower steering shaft to the upper column. Now on a 67 and 68 model, they have a one-piece steering shaft going from all the way from the steering box to the top of the column of the wheel. 69 to 72 has a two-piece column like this, with the lower shaft stays connected to the steering box. You need to pull this clamp off of here, and that'll pull the upper column out of the lower shaft. That's an 11/16 hex. Again, I've got power tools, makes it a lot nicer, easier to do. And there we go. So you get the nut off of there, get the bolt off the back side out of there, set it aside, and now here's where the pry bar comes in. Is you need to get in here. It's a little tricky and sometimes a little work. I did soaked it with PB Blaster starting last night, so the spline should be lubricated. But here's where you want to get in here, get in between the washer and the collar, and pry this apart just like this, and it should go pretty easily. Okay, so when you get the column pried apart from the lower shaft, I use one of these plastic tools here. You want to get your boot, your Firewall boot, pushed off of the Firewall. Let's get it started there like that. That's a little plastic tool. And it'll push right through. Oh. And then you grab the lower shaft in this joint here, and the upper shaft, and you should be able to slide it right out and up. Give it a little nudge with the pry bar, and it slides right out. Then we'll move inside, pull that lower clamp out of the way. Okay, now before you drop the column completely, you want to disconnect the wiring harness. It's generally this half moon. Sometimes they're flat, but it's generally this half moon plug here. Sometimes on the tilts, and even I've seen them on non-tilts, it'll be a flat to half round adapter one way or the other. But they have these two tabs on the side. You want to get underneath the tabs, pull them up on both sides like that with a little screwdriver, and then the plug will unplug. Now they're not always quite that easy. Sometimes you got to struggle with them a little bit. So now we're ready. We'll pull this wire harness through. When the column drops down, you have a little more access in there. Feed it right through there. So you're unplugged, and now you're ready for the column to come out. Now again, if it's got a shifter on it, you're gonna have to maneuver the shifter lever down there through the hole, and that's about it. So that's your column is out. Okay, the other thing I want to show you off the truck, because again, space is limited, it's hard to see down under the hood. A couple of things. Now, on a tilt column application, you will not have the washer and the spring that go in between the lower shaft and the steering column. On a fixed non-tilt column, it has the spring and the washer right here. Tilt columns do not require that at all. But what is very critical is that you get this notch in your column spline lined up properly with the notch where the bolt goes through. Okay? If this is not lined up absolutely correctly, you won't be able to get your bolt through there. So if you get to this point and your bolt doesn't go all the way through like this, to where it's all the way in there, chances are, one of two things could be, chances are you don't have the splines lined up properly. Because as you can see, these are both set proper. Now I'm going to put this in sideways and show you that the bolt won't go in. One spline off changes everything. Can't get the bolt through there now. Doesn't line up good. Okay. The Another thing that could be going on is you could have stretched this clamp out. If you open this clamp up, you shouldn't need to open this clamp up, but just make sure that you get this in there proper. Okay, get your bolt through there. Make sure your bolt's through there correctly. Seated in there. This should be 11/16 nut. This is very critical. You want this thing on there tight. It's got to be tight. This is your steering. Steering and brakes, two most important things. So make sure you get that on there tight. And that should be it. Okay, so I wrapped up the tilt column install last night on the truck. I didn't have a camera person to help me, so I'm showing you some of the last details here on this bare cab. If you look in here above the column in the dash, you can see, maybe you can see where the column sits. For one, you have the square hole, and then up top, that's actually part of the brake pedal bracket. You have this tab right here, comes down. Now that tab locates into the column right there, and it's a little safety feature to keep the column from shoving up into your chest in the case of an accident. So you want to make sure, bear with me with the lighting issue here, it's not working out real good to say the least, but when you put your column up into place, you want to make sure that it's hooked in to that. Okay, you want to make sure that square hole gets that little tab hanging down in the square hole. So get your column up there, get it in the square hole. At this point, you can tighten the ring, get your boot back into the firewall, tighten up this ring here. We'll go into the hood, show you the last couple things, tighten up. Get your half moon clamp up in there, tighten that up as well. Okay, so we're all wrapped up under the hood here as well. We've got the column slid into the lower shaft, the bolt tight. Make sure that this bolt here is tight. And the bolt's seated in the square hole on the other side, and this nut is good and tight. This is your steering, it's very important. Got the clamp back on, tightened up. Bracket on, slid behind. I don't know if you can see that. This bracket slides in behind the brake booster here. Make sure you tighten the nuts on your brake booster. You loosened up to get that bracket out. If you have a support rod here, make sure you get all these tight so you got your brakes working properly, your column secured in there so it's not flopping around. You can see we pulled the boot over the flange it goes on there. I did install a new boot with it, so just double check everything's tight. This is your steering. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of your steering being properly installed and secured. Okay, we've got the boot in, the retainer ring screwed down. See up through that access hole, you might not be able to see. We've got the clamp on the bottom of the column tightened up. We installed the brake and clutch pedal stop plate that also attaches the dash to the brake pedal bracket, secures the dash so it doesn't move around. We got our cover back on, the boot in place, and here we are. We've got tilt, factory tilt column installed in the truck. I did have this tilt column gone through. It had been rebuilt. I had it checked, make sure everything works. Everything works. Turn signals work, the horn works, everything works. So there we have it. I hope this helped you in some way, shape, or form. Hope you learned something out of it. I do appreciate everybody tuning in, watching. I do use snap-on tools as much as possible. I do this for a living, so it's worth paying the money for Snap-on tools. I know a lot of you garage weekend warrior guys, it's just hard to justify the price, and I get it. I totally get it. If I didn't do this for a living, didn't make my money using my tools, I would definitely be buying a less expensive brand. But anyway, once again, if you want to get Tremaine's Trucks hoodie, shirts, hats, some decals, packparadise.com, www.packparadise.com. On Instagram, it's @packparadise. If you go on my Instagram, Tremaine's Trucks, there is a direct link to Pack Paradise. They also can make you any quantity of shirts from 1 to probably 50,000. I don't know. Sorry, Logan, if I misquoted that. But again, www.packparadise.com. On Instagram, @packparadise. They've got a full line of Tremaine's Trucks goodies. I know I've been lagging on my Instagram doing any of the truck trivia, but you also I play a truck trivia game where I test your truck knowledge. And if you're a winner on my truck trivia, you do get a Tremaine's Trucks sticker. If you see me out and about at the swap meets, car shows, which they're going to pick back up. Don't worry, people. They're going to come back. I usually have stickers on me. I'd love to hand them out. So thanks for joining me, watching today on Tremaine's Trucks how-to videos. I appreciate it. If you like what you saw, I am going to be making more videos here soon. So smash like and subscribe. Thank you and have a great day.